It was my first time seeing a chicken in a worship service, but it was also my first time having a third offering in the same worship service. I was with our brothers and sisters in our partner church at Congo Lutheran in Tanzania, and I guess for every hour they just do one more offering. But the third one was different. It was an auction. It was an auction, and for many of us as Americans, we were scratching our heads at why you would have an auction in a church. But what the auction format allowed was for people that didn't have any money to contribute. They could bring an article, something from their house, a bag of rice or a chicken, and they could bring it to worship, and then somebody would buy that chicken or buy that rice, and that the money then would be given in sort of their name, and that way the people who were poor could feel like they were a part of this giving and this offering. It was one of many things I saw in Tanzania that inspired my own generosity and kind of filled my heart with that sense of I want to give and I want to give more. But while I was there, I also saw some things where my heart probably was a little bit hardened by them. At one point, we saw an x-ray machine at this really remote HIV clinic, really a hospital of sorts, and the x-ray machine was broken. And I thought that somebody, had decided they wanted to give this money, but now that it was broken, there was no way it was ever going to get fixed, that they were ever going to have the supplies to run the X machine, or that they were going to have a radiologist who could correctly interpret what was given. And I kind of, again, walked away from that and some other experiences with a little bit harder of a heart about sort of the reality of the problems and corruption and even human sin. And I think for many of us, we sort of have, on the one hand, an impulse to give. On the other hand, a concern about how our gifts will be used and the reality of sort of the hardness of heart and corruption and human sin and really the kind of, I think, hold us back from wanting to give. In today's story, we're at that crossroads of joyful, abundant giving and also the hardness of heart and institutions. The woman today, this poor widow, gives out of scarcity, and Jesus praises it, and it's wonderful. On the other hand, Jesus also criticizes the religious leaders for being more interested in signaling their virtue and outside of sort of the temple walls, abusing their positions of power to hurt people who were poor. In fact, just right before this in Mark's gospel, if we went back, just a little, you turned your Bible a page back, just about a day earlier, Jesus was in the temple. And that day, though, he wasn't praising God. Jesus came into the temple and saw the money changers. You see, God had set up a sacrificial system that even the poor could participate. Every income could offer some sacrifice to the Lord. But in Jesus' day, there were middle managers that emerged, and out of a sort of a false piety not to use Roman money, they made you change into a temple coin. But of course, this just acted as a tax on the poor. And so here we had it. Here was what Jesus saw. Jesus saw that the rich were using as an excuse their faith to hurt the poor. Well, I'm glad that doesn't happen today, so we don't have to worry about that. That was a problem then. But again, Jesus is here, and so Jesus goes really ballistic. And he just starts turning things over. He's so enraged by what he saw, and he has to cleanse the temple. And he cries out in the words of the psalm that my house shall be a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it into a den of robbers. This is the crossroads where we are, where there's corrupt individuals in a corrupt institution, yet Jesus is praising this woman for giving so much of what she has precisely to that institution. So what is going on? Why is Jesus praising this woman? Well, I think first of all, the woman's act of generosity is an act of obedience to a faithful God. Again, this act of charity of the woman is an act of obedience to a faithful God. She recognizes that however little daily bread she has, it has come from the Lord, and that her duty, her response to God's blessing in her life is to give away what she has. And somehow she trusts that in spite of the sinfulness in the temple and the people there, that somehow God will make good and that God will use what she has given for God's purposes. I'd also like to suggest that she gives, and this act of charity is an act of defiance. It's an act of resistance against the values of this world, because the world at this point wants to tell this woman that her gift isn't as important, that her gift doesn't matter. In fact, that she doesn't matter. She's not one of those with the long robes and the large sums. But she has some sense that that she matters to God, and what she has to bring matters to God. Again, her giving is also an act of defiance and resistance against the values of the world that would have sought to demean her. When we think about Jesus' life, we realize and we discover that, of course, Jesus is also one who gives and gives and gives again, and gives over and against the hardness of the human heart, until this reaches its crescendo in the cross, when the very temple leaders have instigated the crowd to cry out, "Crucify him." And Jesus stretches out his arms and says, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." Jesus was obedient to the faithful God, even to his own death on a cross. And Jesus is willing to give all that he has into the hands of sinners because he trusts the living God to redeem his sacrifice, to make good even out of all of that terrible situation, even after that seeming victory of evil. And so Jesus also gives of himself in an act of defiance, in an act of resistance against the values of this world that would have taught him with his power that he should have received his own honor, his own pleasure, sought revenge for those who did this to him. But instead, he chooses a different set of values of peace and reconciliation, forgiveness and love and humility. Again and again, we would see in Scripture that charity, generosity, is both an act of obedience to a faithful God and resistance to a faithless world. So why is it then that we as Christians give? Well, I think it's for the same reasons. This call to obedience to a faithful God and resistance to the world's values. To get at that, I want to look at these thank offering boxes that we've been using the last month to connect faith and finances. And they go back to the 1800s, to a group of women that would form in churches the mite societies. And a mite was another word for a small copper coin. And in some ways, their act was an act of faithfulness, knowing that they had been given by God and that God commanded generosity. And also they wanted to trust that as they pulled their small coins together, God would do something good with it. It's also an act of resistance. They were not given the right to vote yet. In fact, many women were not allowed on church councils. The vast, vast majority of churches in the 1800s. And so they wanted to find a way that they could pull together and bless beyond themselves. But the story, though, really, the more you start to think about it, really starts to reveal God's faithfulness. I want to think about this woman who gave the original mites. That day, when she went to the temple, she said to herself, well, I don't know exactly, but probably something along the lines of, I love the Lord, I'm thankful, and I want to do this trusting in the Lord's goodness. I doubt she went to church or synagogue that day, to temple, and said, today I want to make a legacy and be an enduring 2 millennia example of sacrificial giving. That's not what she said. She was simply faithful, but God had a bigger plan. Again, God had a more mysterious and more wonderful plan, and so this woman who did not set out to make a difference, simply set out to be faithful and obedient, daring to trust in God ends up making a way bigger legacy than any of those wearing long robes that day. In fact, she becomes the exemplar for 2,000 years of sacrificial giving. But it also, on the other end, the women who would give, they would fund mission societies. And in large part, because of their donations and their encouragement, there would be financing for missionaries who would go to places like Tanzania. And now, 150 years later, on a given Sunday, there are more Lutherans in Tanzania worshiping than there are in the United States. Did those women 150 years ago have any sense of that? No, they were simply acting in resistance to the world's values, and they were acting in obedience to the faithful God. So why is it that you and I give? Well, I know you all are givers, and if you're new to this church, I want to let you know you're entering into a very generous group of people. Not a year goes by in which I don't hear about one of you who, in some other nonprofit or your work or maybe some academic institution, is being uplifted for your generosity of your time, your treasure, and your talent. Furthermore, when it's come to the empty bowls this year, this fundraiser we're doing this weekend, every time I turn around, I hear of one more person who somehow is volunteering in one way, shape, or form or another for it. Again, this is a generous people. So why is it, though, that you are generous? I'm sure you have your reasons, but my sense is that part of it does come out of an obedience to a faithful God. That all of us have a sense that we've been blessed in so many ways, and we want to share that with other people. We trust that even though, yes, the world has sinful people, has hardness of heart, has corruption, that we trust that God is a living God who yet will make good out of what we hand over to God. But we also, I think, give in defiance. And when we give, I think we're saying no to some things too. In a world that tells us that we are what we consume, we say no to that. And we say that actually it's not about getting so much, but it's really about sharing and about giving away what was already given to us. In a world that's driven by AI and algorithms, we say no to that, and we say it's actually about people. It's about people and loving people. In a world that's sort of the media always has a narrative of fear and doom, we're saying no to that, and we're saying we're going to live in hope as we give things away, trusting that God is at work. And in this world of cynicism, where we're sort of encouraged to just kind of look out for me, myself, and I, and instead we say no to that, and we say that actually life together, a life lived of faith, hope, and love, that this is indeed the way we're going to choose to live, and we're going to seek life together, trusting in the living God. Maybe to tie it all together, one of the ways in which our church has been generous is we've hosted fifth quarter parties for the kids after the local football games. And this year for the middle school event, I was at the high school football game, and I saw the middle school principal, and she said, "Oh, are you ready for all the kids to come tonight?" And I said, "Well, I don't think we're going to have that many. You know, with the new rules about kids in middle school games, we're not really sure if we're going to get that many people." And she said, "Oh, no, you're going to get a lot of kids." And I said, oh, no, okay. So I'm going back over to church now. And I'm getting a little bit nervous. Turned out we'd have a third of all the middle school at our church. And middle schoolers are really active and really smelly. And so it was a lot of fun. And the thing that probably saved the day was that the middle school principal actually showed up. And I decided that a principal is worth about 20 other adult chaperones in terms of crowd control, because she knew the kids' names, especially the kids whose names needed to be known. And so she was great, and at the end of the night, we're kind of cleaning up, and there was another volunteer, and we're kind of talking, and the volunteer said, "This is a lot of fun, but is this really what we're supposed to be doing as a church? I mean, is this really about Jesus?" I said, "Well, there's a lot more we'd want to do, but sometimes we just have to open up our doors, and we have to, people don't care what you know until they know what you care, right? So we just have to kind of open up our doors and trust and see kind of what happens." Well, again, the Lord has a sense of humor, So the next day, we're at the Fall Festival, and this is really in many ways also for the Early Learning Center, and there's the sacred grounds there, and it's a beautiful day. And around the corner of the church come 5 kids whose names I got to learn the night before. I'm like, what are they doing, right? But they come over, and I find out that one of them has a mom who works at the Early Learning Center, and we get them some food, and, we're talking, and, again, it's a really nice day, and they're having fun with the raffle and so forth. And I said, well, after this is over, would you guys want to come in and see our sanctuary, see our church? And I had a sense that some of them had never been in a church before. And they were kind of like, I walked by it, kind of somewhat interested, but the mom of one of them said, no, I really want you guys, you got to see where we have chapel. Because each week there's about 75 kids here for chapel, and the teachers are participating, and she said, it's beautiful, and I want to show you the class where I teach. So afterwards we go in and we see the class where this mom teaches, and the kids are really proud of their mom and their friend's mom for the teaching that she does here, and she's proud to show it off. And then we go and we come up to the sanctuary. And when the kids walked in, they audibly gasped. They couldn't believe how beautiful of a space this was. Again, for some of them, they've never been in a church before. And one of them actually came up to me, and he said, yo. He did. He said, yo. He didn't call me bro, but he said, yo. So, and I was like, yo. He said, is it free to come here? And I said, yeah, it's free. Right? It's been paid for. And we actually then did a little bit of playing at the organ, and we actually ended up at the baptismal font talking about baptism. But it was really beautiful. It was beautiful to think, what a blessing we have each week to worship here. And so I want to thank you for your generosity to St. Paul. Because again, when we give to God, we never know what's going to happen. And we never know kind of what God does in the beautiful and mysterious ways that then things come to pass. So yeah, there is a lot of hardness of heart in this world. There's lots of reasons to be cynical and discouraged. But when we give, we're defying them and saying, you know what, I'm not going to let the sinfulness of the world harden my heart. And I'm certainly going to trust that God's love is greater than human sin. Because we know that when we give, we're only giving in response to the one who's already given everything for us and daily intervenes in our story over and against the hardness of the human heart to make beautiful things. Amen.